Welcome to our show. This is an edition of Dialogues in Digital, and we have yet another fantastic conversation today. We have a wonderfully amazing person here, Bob Evans. What a delight it is to finally have a conversation with Bob, talk about some of the very interesting technological innovations that he keeps talking about as a thought leader in the wonderful space. An ex, chief communications officer at Oracle, ex-VP of communications at SAP, and a fantastic individual who not only, helps organizations with their next generation visions, but also puts out an unbelievable thought leadership outreach called Cloud Wars. And, cloud, as we all know, is starting to become the bedrock of the kind of computing that's needed for anything, whether it's the right semblance of intelligence, right semblance of blockchain, any sorts of volumes of data, and so forth. So wonderful to have you. Welcome to our show, Bob.
Javed, thank you very much. Thanks for that kind introduction. I hope I can live up to half of the billing you gave me.
Trust me, you'll do much more and beyond than that as well. We'll take it from there. Perfect. So there's a lot that you've seen as you've seen the evolution of some of these companies, especially the Oracles of the world and the SAPs of the world, that are becoming the bedrock of how cloud is shaping, and it's conforming to things as well. In your own sort of ways, how have you seen the evolution of cloud in the last 20 years? Obviously, let's not go back to all the way down to the mainframes, but how this type of computing is starting to take center stage. The conversation is getting more and more complex. The architectures are getting more and more complex. What do you see as the impact that has come through so far, and where do you see it taking us?
Javed, thanks. So often these days, and clearly it's perhaps a sign of, I'm not a young guy anymore, but I think back to, it's about 110 years ago when Henry Ford had just come out with one of the greatest innovations in, the history of business or industry, the assembly line. But his line about customers was you can have any color car you want as long as it's black, right? And that was fine for the time. And, we think about, you bring this, a century forward today, and you walk into a store, right? You go into the candy aisle, and it's not just like there's M&Ms, there's 50 different types of M&Ms. You can design your own running shoes. You can design your own car. You can design your own curriculum. You can design the music that you hear instead of, you turn on the television and hope there's something there you might want to see. So what an extraordinary world that we live in today. And in that Henry Ford line, one of the things that it speaks of is the companies, the makers held all the power. And today it is the buyers and the consumers that hold the power, right? Instead of like, gee, I hope somebody has something that approximates what I want. Today, it is, I'm going to put out exactly what I want, and I will let people compete for my business. So what a remarkable turnaround, and underpinning a lot of that, I think, has been the cloud technology that you and I are both deeply involved in.
So, excellent analogy, the way I think you've summed it up. We've become the orchestrators of how companies should innovate for us. And the way it's evolving, I think it's getting tougher for organizations, because the more consumers are becoming savvy, they're asking and demanding things at the time they want, at the place they want, and the way they want as well. And some of these computing powers and the powers of data are starting to enable that for them in so many ways as well. How do you think these technology companies, the way they either are architected, the way they are culturally built, and the way they are vision-wise attacking some of these types of new ways of thinking, how do you think they're poised to success? And which one of the journeys, in your opinion, is better than the others?
Yeah, Javed, please, if it's okay, let me tick through a few examples on this.
Please be. Please
You've
be.
got Microsoft, right, which I have ranked at #1 on my list of the Cloud Wars top 10, not just because of revenue, but it's the nature of change they've brought, right? Microsoft now, its biggest deals are not just transactional deals, they call them partnerships. And often what Microsoft will do is engage at a very, very deep IP level with their customers to do things like in the case of Novartis, right? You've got Novartis's medical and science experts with Microsoft's technology experts. They're fusing sort of those companies' operational technology with Microsoft's information technology expertise to do stuff nobody's done before. You look at Salesforce, and Mark Benioff often says one of the top conversations he has with customer CEOs is about culture, not about deep technology. So you see the nature of that changing. Look at Google Cloud. A piece that I wrote yesterday morning was Thomas Kurian, as CEO, hasn't even been there 2 years, and he has changed the culture of that company from top to bottom. They always had fabulous technology, but Thomas has brought to Google Cloud a sense of customer centricity and this sense of customer empathy, where in the past, Google might almost have looked at customers and say, what sort of bozos would ever cobble together all that crap that you have over the last 40 years? Well, I don't think any company intended to do that. It's just, it was what was available at the time. And now there's something remarkable, but Google Cloud has, under Kurian now, developed a sense of empathy for customers. You see in a company like Oracle, and even in the last couple of years that I was at Oracle, as they tried to switch not just their technology from on-premise to the cloud, but their whole delivery system, their cultural idea. Right before the on-premise thing, with any on-premise software company is like, hey, I'll drop off some CDs on your loading dock, you give me a check, and we are done. You know, it's your problem now. But with the cloud, it is incumbent on the technology vendors to ensure those customers succeed. So instead of the relationship ending at the transaction, it really just begins. Because unless they can drive ongoing success for those customers, the customers are going to go somewhere else. So we see, the last one I'll toss out is IBM, you know, an iconic company, but now they have turned finally their entire company around. They said it's all about driving into the hybrid cloud. And so they've harnessed all of the capabilities, all those wide-ranging business units to service customers, with the lead of that being through the cloud. So it's an incredible evolution. I think in the last 2 or 3 years, these big tech companies have changed faster than they ever would have thought possible. And then, Javed, as we all know, over the last 8 months, that acceleration has had to even magnify. So it's really been extraordinary to see this, all driven by what customers want and need, and the fact that customers now have more choices, and they will exercise those choices if these big tech companies, regardless of how big they are, don't meet the exacting and emerging needs of their customers.
Very interesting point you raise here around the customers. I think the evolution of the way technology is perceived or bought in the last probably 20 years is completely evolved. And to your point, the journey begins when you sign this up. Even my days at Salesforce, one of the things we really excited about was customer success. If whatever was bought was not, you know, implemented right, it doesn't get utilized. If it doesn't get utilized, it doesn't get renewed at the end, right? Because and that's the bedrock of cloud, the whole subscription economy and so forth. So you're looking at not only a way of delivery of the software or whatever you call software these days, but also the operating model and the commercial model around that as well. What do you think is the 3.0 of this? I mean, that's a good 2.0 that most of these companies, and again, this is a little bit of a wild question out there, cloud becomes the central point of delivery of everything. Where do you think they'll fight next?
Well, you know, Javed, I think that's a fantastic question. I think it's going to be so interesting to see the changes that occur, right? And I've been and following the tech industry for a long time. I think it's been a blast. I think it's been one of the most extraordinary industries. But, you know, over these last 25, 30 years, a lot of that has been, I'm going to say incremental. And I don't mean that dismissively, right? They had this sort of product. They made it a little bit better. They made it a little less expensive. They allowed it to do this or this a little bit more. I think this 3.0 version that you've talked about here, it's going to be centered around a few different things. One of which is that example I cited with Microsoft. It's not like we will make some software, you buy it, you install it, and then it came to cloud. We want to help ensure your success. I think the driver for 3.0 is going to be, how do we as technology vendors help you as the customer become the sort of company you need to be in the future to survive, to thrive, and to do things you never thought possible. So it isn't just digitally transforming where somebody has been and making them a little more efficient and productive and so on going forward. It's really going to be helping those companies change their business models, change their vision, change their culture, change the heart of value that they offer to the marketplace. And that example, like Microsoft and Novartis, the CEO of Novartis, an extraordinary guy, but one of the things that he said when he came in was, the pharmaceutical industry, he said, we've done some incredible stuff, clearly, changed the world with a lot of the discoveries from pharmaceutical. But he said, we have allowed ourselves over time to become conditioned that to create a new pharmaceutical product, it takes 12 and a half years and $2.5 billion. And he said, that is just not acceptable these days. We have better technology, we have better capabilities, we have new ways of doing things. But he said the companies had woven that and bound that into their cultures, where they didn't look beyond that, Javed, because they didn't think it was possible. So one of the things the partnership with Microsoft and Novartis are doing, they created something called an AI innovation lab. Mm-hmm. And they are setting out there to do stuff where one of their goals is, we believe that in the not so distant future, we'll be able to discover new, what they call molecules or medications or pharmaceutical products exclusively with data, not with trials, not with, human test intervention.
Absolutely.
So I think the heart of that there, that the 3.0 is going to be, how do the technology companies come in and fuse at a really deep foundational level their best capabilities with the customer's best capabilities, not to just do productivity stuff or efficiency, but create entirely new things that neither company ever could possibly have been able to do on its own.
And I think it's also a combination of human capability up until that point and the capability of the machine that's learning us. It's continuously sort of evolving. AI, as they say, is like a 7 to 8 year old child that's sort of growing together with some of these younger kids of today's generation, and we'll come back to that as well. So speaking of the computing aspects of business and the evolution of it, talk about the still the 3.0, where things need to go, where infrastructures of cloud need to evolve and the capabilities need to evolve and so forth. It's also bordering with ethics. What are the ethics of all of this? I mean, we've seen Zuckerberg sit in front of Senate steering committees. We've seen Sundar Pichai sit there and others as well. The ethics conversations have been more on consumer computing so far as a whole. When does it sort of get to the enterprise computing for? And do you think these enterprise computing companies, the way they're set up, the way they're culturally operating, do you think they're keeping that into mind as they're growing?
Yeah. Well, Javed, somebody said the other day that when the tech companies switched their primary model from on-premise delivery to the cloud, they said, one way of looking at that is we become the IT organization.
Absolutely.
Or we become a huge part of the IT organization for all these businesses.
Absolutely.
So they're inside, they're inside the gates. They are operating inside some of these companies in that respect. So I think it's going to be more incumbent than ever before on these big tech companies to the enterprise tech companies to ensure that what they're doing has the highest level of capability and focus on everything from privacy to security, you know, to the regulatory things about where data resides. I think it's interesting that language, Javed, one of the terms that's come up that I think is so interesting, right? We used to talk about data residency. Well, now it's data sovereignty.
Sovereignty, absolutely.
And I'm telling you, 3 or 4 years ago, if somebody had tried to tell you that we will confer on data a sense of sovereignty, you would have said, hey, you know,
what are you talking about?
Put the pipe down, you know, it's enough. But so I think the heart of what you're getting at here is so much around, you know, data, and your terrific podcast, your show here, Dialogues in Digital, is so much about this thing of, can we keep a sense of control on data, but also give it enough freedom, give it enough latitude, give the people who work with it enough latitude to use it to its full extent, but without ever abusing it. Because I think for businesses, right, that, you know, it's come to the point now where it's not just an inconvenience for them or a PR hit or a financial hit if they have a breach. The trust that is lost among business or consumers, customers for them, is devastating. So I would hope that there will be tighter than ever collaboration between the tech companies, who are now in part the IT organizations for their customers, and also the customers, so that they understand fully we have to give all those issues that you raised the absolute highest priority, because without that, they are heading for disaster.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very interesting answer there, Bob. So one of the things that, you know, I struggle with when you know, our team and, you know, when we're talking to, you know, customers and prospects, and we're delivering key messages to the boards or the C-suites of various organizations, a lot of times I realize that, you know, people that have grown up the tech ranks within organizations, whether they grew up the ranks of CIOs or CTOs or and the works, had a certain job to do. They you know, they had a certain mandate to keep the lights on their networks or keep the applications on and so forth. A lot of the other folks that grew up the ranks of finance and operations and sales and marketing and other were running the show, so to speak, and so forth. I see a lot of that changing, you know, with chief digital officers and chief information security officers and technologists and others that are in the ranks as well. There seems to be a horizontalization of types of skill sets that are needed to, you know, sort of evolve organizations rather than vertical silos. And I'm seeing gaps in comprehension from the business side for technology and from the technology sides of the business as becoming the de facto, you know, sort of blockers for them to sort of do well. Do you think many of these leaders of today understand both sides that are needed to run a 21st century cloud and AI-enabled organization? And do you think if they don't, what are some of the things they really should understand on what's about to come to succeed in the future?
Javed, you know, thanks. That's a fantastic question. And to some extent or another, that dynamic or that tension, that interplay has been around for a long time. It just hasn't been as critical as it is today because remember, you're probably too young. I am not too young to remember companies would put out 7-year plans or 10-year plans. And at some point they'd say, well, we're in month 85 of our 10-year plan and we're pretty much on target. So, you know, let's go to the next item on the agenda. It's just unfathomable the pace at which things used to go relative to now. Well, now, and so in those days, you know, when you had 7-year plans and 10-year plans, you had 2 or 3 or 4 years to adjust or fix it. And if this didn't work, well, we'll make a 3-year plan. We'll come out of it. You got 3 months today.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah.
So these gaps that were tolerable back then, or were some inconvenience, and in some ways you've had right, they caused those things to take so long because this side didn't know what this side was saying, and they were talking over, around, and under, and they try to bring in outsiders, and to some degree that helps. You got to get the right outsiders, a company like yours, to get in who can understand the whole circle. But there is no tolerance for today for lack of knowledge, or for those gaps, for those holes, because ultimately what it means is the company's not focused on the customer. They're focused on their own internal expertise, their own internal weaknesses that they try to cover up with cultural or with organizational structures. And then I always thought it was an insult to CIOs, if we look at the tech side, when a CIO would say, you know, my job is to align the technology with the business, right? It sounds okay, but what's the underlying theme there? They're saying that the IT organization is not part of the business because it's outside and must somehow be aligned with it. That mindset today is going to kill companies very quickly. And in the same way, if you are an executive in sales or marketing, product development, or something like that, and you have built up some goofy mindset that says, I don't need to understand the impact of technology on the decisions we make and where we're headed, there too, disaster lies. So I think in either sense, Javed, these gaps have to be eliminated. They've got to be closed. They've got to be not just closed, but there's got to be this ongoing spectrum or continuum of expertise along this, anchored around what customers in the marketplace wants and needs, not on some 5 or 10 or 20 or 50-year-old organizational structure that was not good then and it's deadly today.
How has COVID changed a lot of this, Bob?
Yeah, we've I mentioned it, just as we were getting started, Javed, I became a grandfather about 5 weeks ago, and I wonder just how different the world that little girl is going to grow up in than, somebody who was born 5 or 6 years ago. But so there's the huge personal impact that we've all been dealing with for the last 8 or 9 months. But truly, you've seen, I think it was Satya Nadella who first said it, we've seen 3 years of digital transformation take place in 3 months.
3 months, absolutely.
So Larry Ellison yesterday on their company's virtual event talking about their new CX strategy, he was saying quite bluntly, he said the world will never, ever go back. And he said anybody who thinks that we're going to go back to a 9-to-5 world where people commute, an hour and 10 minutes and they sit in an office from 9 to 5 and they go back, he said, you're crazy. He said that we will never go back. We'll keep some offices and headquarters. Bill McDermott, the CEO of ServiceNow, Javed, said the office or the headquarters office, he said, it's going to be okay. But he said, instead of becoming a destination, he said, it's a productivity tool. Use it when you need it. Don't use it when you don't have to. So, but gosh, this intense focus on not, again, operational efficiencies, which are important, but more so on business models and the reimagination of what is possible, what is it that people want and need today, what can I do to very rapidly adapt to that, and how do I have to shift some things that were sort of core to me but are no longer valued by the marketplace, or that the marketplace can't accept or tolerate because of the restrictions that we have to live with right now. So it has hypercharged the pace of change. I think it has also dramatically and extraordinarily changed the extent of that change, right? It's not about a little bit faster, a little bit cheaper. It's a totally new way of imagining things. And I expect it will have placed a great deal of much needed emphasis on companies saying, I've got to do what the customers want rather than continue to try to do what is convenient or easy or what I know. I've got to move into the world of what does that customer want and need, because without that, there's just no hope for these companies today. And I don't say that, happily or trying to be a tough guy or something. I'm not. It is a blunt matter of, an unexpected change. A meteor hits a perfectly fine planet. That planet's never going to be the same. It is knocked off its orbit. And I think in some ways, COVID has done that to us. Everything that we do in our lives is different now. And in the business world, anybody who tries to drag forward their stuff from the past because it's what I know, or it's what I'm comfortable with, or what I hope will survive. They're just in for a terrible surprise. So it's a test of leadership that I think is going to bring out the best in people for the folks who can overcome this. And the interplay between technology and business now is more intense and vital than ever.
And Bob, you're right. I think it's going to get further intensified as things move along. Let's talk about the customer. You know, as the journeys of the customers have evolved, you know, especially for the bigger ones, they rely on technology by one of the big ones, right? The SAPs and the Salesforces and the ServiceNows, or the Oracles and Microsofts of the world, and so forth. And then you guys wrote a fantastic piece on how, you know, customer experience. You wrote a fantastic piece on how customer experience and customer relationship management sort of are intertwined and intertwined and so forth. I want to understand you know, where your thoughts are in terms of the two different approaches. You know, forget the technological part that's at the back end, but what do you think a CRM approach helps an organization with their customer versus a CX approach does? And where do you think are the intersections and the deviations?
You know, it's almost like sports competition, right? If you listen to, or, you know, boxing, if you listen to this boxer talk about this boxer, and then you listen to this boxer talk about this boxer, it's like they're not saying anything remotely like each other. So you hear a CX company talk about what Salesforce does, the CRM company. Mm-hmm. The CX people said, oh, that's all yesterday. It's all about sales automation and opportunity lists. And then you hear Salesforce talk about CX people, and they say, if you don't get CRM right, you can never get CX right. And they're trying to jump on a new thing going forward. So, you know, in a way, this is entertaining. It's interesting at a strategy level. It's really quite remarkable to see how these companies are trying to do it. But ultimately, what is so wonderful for business customers these days is you get this really remarkably intense competition. And think about those companies, Javed, who are involved in this: SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, Adobe, ServiceNow coming in from a different direction, and then the kingpin, the category creator of Salesforce here. And I think it's so interesting what Mark Benioff has done, you know, over just, you know, a couple quarters ago. He said, no, he said, these other guys go out and they try to create big end-to-end suites. And he said, they diversify and their focus is all over the place. We just focus on CRM. And that's true. But Mark Benioff clearly is no dummy. And what he has been doing along the way is he takes the CRM, which was this 20 years ago, and he's just steadily, right, expanded the definition and the, you know, the boundaries around what CRM is. So it's a remarkable thing, but there's millions of ways to come at it. I think some of the stuff ServiceNow is doing, they're not in any way trying to compete at the level of what those other big traditional CRM or CX companies are doing, but they're trying to come in it from a workflow point of view. Microsoft is the infrastructure partner for a lot of these companies, and yet Microsoft Dynamics 365 has its own, you know, CRM stuff. So you're seeing maneuverings and diplomacy and engagements of a types, you know, we've never seen before. And one of the things that Larry Ellison said yesterday, that's, you know, defining thing, what he says for Oracle CX is, he said, the other CX places, he said, they automate, you know, the sales process, and that's for managers. He said, ours is completely different because what we do is we help salespeople sell more. Mm-hmm. He said, the other stuff is about management and bureaucracy. He said, us, it's about revenue. So the customer, Javed, I think is, you know, careful business customers evaluating this extraordinary landscape of choices and alternatives, you know, provided those customers are willing to put in, you know, the necessary legwork and hard work, they're going to benefit from this competition. I mean, can you imagine these handful of world-class companies all desperately innovating as fast as they can, as aggressively as they can, coming out with, you know, you tell us what you want, we'll deliver it. So it's a great winning market. right, for any business customers who are trying to figure out what to do with it. And, I'm sure the help that your company is giving to people these days is going to be so essential, because there's a range of choices. So almost like whatever a business customer could imagine, I want it this way, the choices are out there. So it's definitely a buyer's market today. It's fascinating.
Absolutely, Bob, and it's very well explained. It's funny to say that we were helping a large $5 billion Asian bank buy a customer suite for themselves, and it's funny, all the big ones were competing, and SAP was coming in from a very CX lens because Qualtrics is their big baby, and I met some of those leaders there and talked about that as well, and then Salesforce, obviously, the nuts and bolts of, and then Microsoft came in with a little bit of a hybrid approach. I've always maintained with, a lot of my customers that advise that you have to almost look at how some of these companies have evolved. I mean, if you look at Oracle, deep down, it was a database company that became an application company, and then they kind of moved on. SAP was more around packaging, logistics, and supply chains, and so forth. And then they sort of ventured into some of these things. And Microsoft Suite was born out of their Outlook aspect and SharePoint aspect, which they sort of wrapped into something more dynamics. And then Salesforce, I think it was Mark saying, "Hey, I don't like Siebel. Let's go build something." So in many cases, it's an intertwine of so many different, leaders from these very same organizations taking a different crack at something and then sort of evolving it. But the good thing, like you said, is eventually the customer is winning out of this. They've got amazing technologies and innovations that are coming out of these vendors, so to speak. And even within the vendor landscape, there's a frenemies aspect. I mean, Salesforce was built on the Oracle kernel, yet they were competing and so forth. But what do you see AI taking this? And let me qualify that question for you. One of the conversations I was having with the CIO recently was that if you look at computing as a whole, or these applications as a whole, as they're evolving, it's almost becoming a box with all sorts of data in it. And then through a layer, whether it's conversational or voice enabled or whatever, it's going in, swimming in, and coming in with the right type of data that you need to do whatever you want to do eventually anyways. So the engagement layer is evolving, and then the back-end data layer is evolving as well. How do you think this semblance of AI and data and technology, and we don't have to go into the technical weeds, but conceptually, how do you think that has changed the dynamic of more the customer focus? And where do you think it's going to go in the future?
Yeah, Javed, first, I just want to say, I think, language matters a lot. And I think it's so interesting to think about artificial intelligence. I don't know when that term was coined, 30, 40, maybe 50 years
1959.
ago? 1959. Okay. So 60 years ago. And at the time, to the best of anybody's understanding, it was intelligence, but it wasn't really real, right? It was in some machine. It was in something that, wasn't very well understood. So it's artificial. It's as real today, right, as anything you could possibly imagine. So nobody's going to change the name, but I think we're going to hear more about AI. And, 5 years from now, kids in school will say, what does that stand for? And nobody will believe it when they say it's artificial. Well, because as you described a little while ago, it's in everything that they do, everything that they touch. So I think that, another way to look at AI, those two terms, and where I think its biggest potential is, to your question here, because I think it's an accelerator of innovation. I think it is going to free people up from doing the drudge work. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, but sort of slogging through a lot of things that technology was created to automate, or to let people do. So provide people with more insights that allows them to make the best choice, to pass that along to customers, to help people in this world that, as you and I have talked about over the last several minutes, it's moving faster than it ever has before. And when I think about the accelerator, AI means accelerating innovation, also accelerating insights. It can plow through mountains of data in this new data economy we're in to allow people to get to the right choices, the right ideas. And I think we're only scratched the surface of what its real potential is in taking these, raw material, the data is, and it's sitting, like under a mountain, like gold somewhere. And it's going to take some of the new AI solutions to extract that data from the mountains of silos that it sits in now, and to try to find the gold that's in there. But I think it's a remarkable time. I also think, Javed, to the question that you asked broadly about this with machine learning, and somebody say, yeah, machine learning has been around for 30 years. Well, why did it never become so prominent as it is now? Because it was the province of companies that could build these massive systems that could crank up the horsepower necessary to look at machine learning and to come in and hire, armies of data scientists to be able to make the whole thing work. Thomas Kurian from Google Cloud last year about this time, he said, look, these big businesses, they know what they have to do. And he said, but to do it themselves, they'd have to go out and hire, 250, 300, 500 data scientists. He said, that's possible. He said, but it's really
They're not
hard to
available.
do, right, for a company that is not in the hiring data scientist business.
Right.
And he said, once you come on board, then you got to buy all this and set this up. And he said, you can go to some of these companies that specialize now in providing this as a service right through the pipeline. So again, I think it is the delivery mechanism for AI and ML solutions at their highest, most wonderful potential for businesses is cloud. It is the ideal mechanism for it. And that's why I think we're seeing this, extraordinary level of innovation being unleashed around AI and ML. So it took widespread adoption of cloud to make this possible. And I think we're just at the beginning of what these tech companies are able to do in both weaving AI and ML into their existing products, and also then creating very unique AI and ML services that businesses can use for their own particular outcomes.
Very well put, Bob. So, speaking of these companies, the cloud companies, I know you talk about the top 10 quite a bit as well. Which are the ones that are not making it into the top 10 for you, but they're up and coming? And where do you think they're chipping away at?
Javed, yeah, I never meant for the Cloud Wars top 10 to be exclusionary. Let me just take a second to tell you why I did that. It's 4 years ago, I decided I had a lot of fun at Oracle, did what I wanted to do there, but I wanted to start my own business, and I ended up starting two. And the Cloud Wars top 10 was basically, I said, these are going to be, the companies that can make it into that are going to have a disproportionately large impact on the world. So I want to focus on them. And also, I don't think that there had been enough sort of really pretty rigorous coverage of them. It's hard to understand enough about the technology and the business to see where this is going. Plus, it's stuff I like. So I said, I want to get into that. And I also, at this point in my life and my career, I don't want to have employees. I love people. I love working with other people, but I don't want to go through the bureaucracy and all that of having employees. So I had to tailor what I covered and what this company is about to something that I could manage. So 10 seemed like a number that I could handle.
Okay.
So I have enormous respect for, all the tech companies that are out there, and some of these smaller, vibrant ones are coming in, and they are disrupting companies that are 1,000 times bigger than they are. And they're forcing these big companies to stay really fast, really nimble. Don't wait. Don't think that, this is just stuff that's out on the fringes. It has forced a level of awareness. I guess, what was it? Andy Grove, what was that? Paranoid about, being paranoid about things, which is good, because I think it's going to help those 10 big companies move faster, innovate more quickly. And they're going to say, if I thought I was tied in closer with my customers before, I better double down on that. You've seen it in fintech, you've seen it in martech, you've seen it in a lot of these other industries where
Okay.
these small, nimble guys coming up, they can do a point solution that is wildly disruptive. In the past, we would have been able to gloss over that and say, oh, well, that's,
Doesn't matter.
I'll add something in 2 years, right? Or I'll make it hard for them to integrate with my stuff. All those things are gone. So I think, the startup communities, around the world, we mentioned COVID, and I think one of the things Larry Ellison talked about yesterday at that CX event for Oracle was he said every company in every country on earth is going to have full unfettered access to the best talent in every country
Country
on
in the
earth.
world. Absolutely.
So he
Absolutely.
said, we have knocked down these barriers. And he said, it is going to be one of the things that allows smaller companies, more nimble, more aggressive companies to come in and do things that are more responsive to customer needs, that are more focused toward where the future and where customers are headed, and less so that mindset that all big companies get in of, I got to protect my legacy. I got to protect the status quo. So I think it's these small companies, there's tremendous futures for them. And I hope they keep coming up and making the big guys be the very best they can be all the time.
And very well said as well again. And it's funny the number of things that are starting to go in the cloud, not just enterprise software. So we're doing a lot of work right now in the cloud communication space. So CPaaS, which is Cloud Platform as a Service, we're global partners with Vonage. You see Vonage, Twilio, RingCentral, 8x8. There's so many others that are almost becoming the last mile of the customer with voice and video and and texts and everything, driving some of these consumer and customer behaviors. And I think that's what led SAP to buy Qualtrics as well. I think they dropped about $9 to $10 billion in there as well. So a lot of evolution, a lot more data, a lot more bandwidth, a lot more computing power, a lot more AI coming through the ranks. And like you said, we're just at the beginning of this, man. There's a lot more to come through. Any parting thoughts on, the evolution of technology throughout your years of working, and, the good, the bad, the ugly, and what really scares you around it?
Yeah. Javed, this has been a great conversation. Thanks very much for having me. And, I'm an optimist by my nature, but also it's by my choice. And so I want to, share one thought, and that is, inside companies, there's a tendency, as we've talked about, the cultural aspect. It just cannot be overlooked now, because that drives everything. And today, whatever business somebody's in, a technology business, retail, restaurants, trucking, manufacturing, whatever it is, there has been a tendency for a long time for leaders to say things like, that's not what we do. That's not the business we're in. That's not blah, 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 And in some cases, that's absolutely the right answer. But more and more today, it's less so about businesses continuing to be in the business they were in, then they've got to be in the business that their customers want them to be in. And I think that this wild new generation of cloud technology and artificial intelligence and the speed at which some of this stuff is capable, and the cloud brings to the smallest entrepreneurs on earth the same level of computing capability and capacity and power as the biggest companies on earth. So there's been a leveling there that's come up. And any big company in any industry, if there are leaders who are blinded to these changes happening out on the margins that are coming up, that haven't sort of cracked through and become a deadly existential threat to them yet, they got to start to think that way. And I think the field that you and TransformX are in about CX and tying into that, how tightly can you connect the way you think and what you do to where the marketplace is headed, rather than believing that, if I just stay in my lane and, don't get too caught up in all this craziness around me, I'll be fine. Because it's a very, very, very different world than it was a year ago, 5 years ago, and certainly 7 or 10 years ago. So the future belongs to the bold, and the bold, I think, are trying to say, I'm going to move as fast and as radically as the marketplace needs me to move. And the cloud has just been both the cause of that and also the solution, I think, for a lot of what they're looking for. So thanks for a chance to share some ideas with you and your audience. And it has been a great opportunity to spend time with you, Javed.
Bob, it was a complete pleasure. We completely want to thank you for not only what you talked about today, but your contribution to the space overall. It's a testament to how one person and their army of one can make a massive difference. So please keep doing what you're doing. This will not be the first or the last time that we'll talk about some of these things. We'll do more collaborations in the future as well. And we wish you all the best in your current and future endeavors.
Thanks, Javed. That's wonderfully said. You're very kind. Thanks so much.
All the best on that one.